Governments promise freedom, stability, and opportunity. But history tells a different story. Behind every empire, every modern state, and every financial system lies a quiet mechanism of control. If you understand how governments have always moved wealth upward, you will never see money the same way again. Trust that the system is designed for your benefit. Trust that your sacrifices are necessary. Trust that tomorrow will be better because of what you give up today. But history tells a far less comforting story. When you strip away slogans and speeches, governments have never existed to make individuals financially free. They exist to preserve power, maintain control, and ensure their own survival. Financial freedom for the population has always been secondary and often inconvenient to those goals. A financially independent population is difficult to govern, difficult to tax, and difficult to mobilize for war or political ambition. This is not a conspiracy. It is a structural reality. Every government requires resources. Armies must be paid. Bureaucracies must be fed. Infrastructure must be maintained. When these needs grow faster than productivity, the state faces a choice: extract more openly from its citizens or find quieter, less visible ways to do so. Open taxation sparks resistance. Hidden extraction breeds compliance. History shows which option rulers consistently prefer. What makes this system so effective is not cruelty, but psychology. Governments rarely present their actions as self-serving. Instead, they frame them as necessary for the common good. Higher prices become economic growth, currency debasement becomes stimulus, borrowing becomes investment in the future, losses imposed on the public are renamed as shared responsibility. And most people accept it, not because they are foolish, but because the mechanisms are deliberately obscured. Financial systems are complex by design. The average citizen is not taught monetary history, debt mechanics, or currency theory. Schools focus on obedience and productivity, not financial literacy. As a result, people experience the effects of policy: rising prices, shrinking savings, longer working hours without ever seeing the cause. They feel poorer, but are told the economy is strong. They struggle more, but hear that the system is working. This disconnect is not accidental. From ancient empires to modern democracies, the most successful financial systems are not those that create widespread wealth, but those that convince people they are free while quietly limiting their options. The greatest trick governments ever pulled was not taxation or inflation. It was convincing generations of citizens that these tools were normal, unavoidable, and even beneficial. To understand how this deception works, we must begin where it all started, with the oldest financial weapon ever used against the public. Inflation is often described as a natural feature of economic life, a mild inconvenience that accompanies growth and modernization. Governments speak of it calmly, central banks measure it with technical language, and economists debate it as if it were a force of nature, like weather or gravity. But history reveals a far more deliberate truth. Inflation is not merely an accident of economics. It is one of the oldest and most reliable tools governments have used to extract wealth from their populations without ever admitting they are doing so. Long before central banks, spreadsheets, and policy committees, rulers understood a simple principle: if you control money, you control value. And if you can reduce the value of money quietly, you can take from everyone without asking permission. Ancient Rome perfected this tactic. For centuries, the Roman denarius was trusted across the empire because of its high silver content. It functioned not just as currency, but as a store of value. Soldiers were paid in it, merchants saved it, families passed it down through generations. But as Rome expanded, the costs of maintaining legions, borders, and political loyalty exploded. Raising taxes openly risked rebellion. So emperors chose a subtler path. They reduced the silver content of the coin. At first, the change was barely noticeable. A small reduction here, a slight alloy there. The coin looked the same, felt the same, and carried the same official value. But over time, the denarius became a shadow of itself. What had once been nearly pure silver was eventually a little more than copper coated with a thin silver wash. The state pretended nothing had changed. Prices told a different story. As more debased coins entered circulation, prices rose. Savings lost value. Wages lagged behind costs. The public did not receive a tax bill, but they paid all the same. This was inflation in its purest form, a silent tax imposed on every holder of currency. Rome funded its empire not by taking money directly, but by destroying the purchasing power of money already owned by its citizens. The consequences were devastating. Trust in the currency collapsed. Barter returned. Economic coordination broke down. By the 3rd century, inflation had become so severe that it contributed directly to social unrest, military instability, and the long decline of Roman authority. The method, however, did not disappear with Rome. It evolved. Modern governments no longer shave silver from coins, but the principle is identical. When states spend beyond their means, central banks create money. Prices rise, debts shrink in real terms. Savers lose, governments gain. Inflation remains what it has always been, a tool that transfers wealth upward, quietly, efficiently, and without consent. When inflation alone was not enough, governments turned to another powerful tactic: forced lending. Unlike taxation, which was visible and often resisted, forced loans allowed rulers to extract large sums of capital while preserving the illusion of legality, duty, and temporary sacrifice. Throughout the Middle Ages, this method became a standard financial weapon in the arsenals of European monarchies. Kings in England, France, and Spain were perpetually short of money. Wars were frequent, courts were expensive, and maintaining loyalty among nobles required constant spending. Open taxation had limits, especially in societies where the consent of estates, parliaments, or assemblies was required. Forced loans offered a workaround. Wealthy merchants, bankers, and guild leaders were summoned and asked to lend money to the crown. The word asked is doing heavy work here. These loans were rarely voluntary. Refusal carried consequences: fines, confiscation of goods, imprisonment, or exclusion from trade. In many cases, merchants were told their contribution was a patriotic duty, essential for the defense of the realm or the honor of the king. Loyalty was measured not by words, but by how much capital one was willing to surrender. On paper, these arrangements appeared fair. The crown often promised repayment with interest. In reality, repayment was uncertain at best. When it came at all, it was frequently delayed for years, paid in devalued currency, or reduced through political maneuvering. Some loans were simply forgotten, erased by the passage of time or the death of the ruler who had demanded them. The financial burden fell disproportionately on those who had accumulated wealth through trade and enterprise. Merchants learned a dangerous lesson: success made them targets. The more prosperous they became, the more visible they were to the state. Wealth did not grant security, it attracted extraction. This system served the crown well. Wars were financed, palaces were built, power was preserved. The state maintained the appearance of solvency without openly raising taxes on the broader population. Meanwhile, private capital was drained, not through markets, but through coercion disguised as civic responsibility. The deeper effect was psychological. Forced loans taught elites that their wealth was conditional, allowed to exist only so long as it served state interests. It also taught the general population that sacrifice was virtuous. When demanded from above, the idea that citizens owed the state their resources became normalized. Although the language has softened over time, the structure remains familiar. Modern governments still frame debt purchases as safe, patriotic, and necessary. The medieval loan and the modern bond differ in form, but not in spirit. Both transform private savings into fuel for state ambition. By the 17th century, European governments had refined the art of converting public resources into private profit. Coercion and inflation were effective, but they were limited by political risk and economic disruption. A more sophisticated mechanism emerged when the British government created the Bank of England in 1694, a development that would transform finance and cement a system of wealth transfer that persists to this day. England faced a critical problem. Wars with France demanded enormous funds, and traditional taxation could not keep pace. Borrowing privately was risky. Investors feared defaults or political upheaval. The solution was to create a state-backed bank, one that could mobilize private capital while guaranteeing returns. Wealthy investors purchased government bonds, essentially lending money to the crown. In return, the government promised fixed interest payments, financed through taxes on the broader population. On the surface, it seemed mutually beneficial. The crown received funds to fight wars and maintain authority. Investors received secure income far above what ordinary commerce could yield. The public, meanwhile, was told that this system ensured national prosperity and financial stability. They were assured that lending to the state was a civic duty and a mark of patriotism. In reality, ordinary citizens bore the ultimate burden through indirect taxation, duties on salt, beer, cloth, and other essentials, while bondholders enjoyed predictable, risk-free gains. This arrangement was not charity or fairness. It was a carefully engineered wealth transfer. It rewarded those who were already wealthy, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Capital bred capital, while labor and consumption funded the system. The Bank of England institutionalized what medieval forced loans had begun, converting the labor and resources of the many into income for the few. While legitimizing the process through law, contracts, and national rhetoric, the implications extended far beyond war finance. This model set the precedent for modern public debt systems. Governments discovered that bonds were more than instruments of borrowing. They were a tool to channel wealth upward, stabilize power, and create financial hierarchies under the guise of national interest. Today, the safest investments in the world remain lending to governments. But the logic is unchanged. The gains are private, the costs are public. By transforming borrowing into a routine, legally sanctioned mechanism, the state made financial extraction invisible and normalized. Citizens no longer felt the direct sting of coerced loans or devalued coins. Instead, taxation, inflation, and debt servicing became systemic, naturalized, and nearly impossible to resist. In essence, the public traded freedom for the illusion of security, the same illusion that has repeated itself throughout financial history, from Rome to modern central banks. In the modern era, governments have perfected the art of financial illusion. While medieval rulers relied on forced loans and debased coins, today's states operate on a far more sophisticated scale: deficit spending. Politicians publicly justify borrowing as a tool to fund infrastructure, social programs, or job creation, presenting it as a direct benefit to citizens. But a closer examination reveals a far more deliberate reality, a mechanism that channels wealth upward while placing invisible burdens on the public. Deficit spending occurs when governments spend more than they collect in revenue, often issuing bonds to cover the difference. The promise is that this spending will stimulate economic growth, increase employment, and improve quality of life. Politicians frame it as an investment in the nation's future, yet the beneficiaries are rarely the average citizens. Large portions of these funds flow to defense contractors, corporate subsidies, banks, and industries with political influence. Ordinary taxpayers, meanwhile, bear the ultimate cost, either through future tax increases, inflation, or the reduction of social benefits. The brilliance of this system lies in its perception. Borrowing does not feel like taxation. Spending does not appear as wealth extraction. Citizens see new programs, construction projects, or government handouts and assume they are the direct recipients of benefits. They rarely stop to ask who profits before the public sees any return. Who funds the interest on these bonds? The answer is almost always the wealthy and politically connected. Over time, deficit spending accumulates, creating national debt that cannot simply be repaid by cutting back on government extravagance. When repayment or servicing becomes unavoidable, the cost is distributed across the population indirectly. Inflation silently erodes savings. Taxes rise gradually. Public services are trimmed. Meanwhile, bondholders continue to receive guaranteed interest, securing wealth without taking any of the risk. The cycle repeats. The state borrows, the elite gains, and the public pays. Deficit spending is also disguised as necessity. Governments argue that reducing spending during economic downturns or emergencies would be catastrophic. This creates a psychological and political trap. The public accepts debt as inevitable, even essential. By the time citizens grasp the consequences, shrinking real wages, rising living costs, and increasing inequality, the system has already transferred immense amounts of wealth upward. This mechanism is not a flaw or a policy error. It is a feature of modern governance. Through deficit spending, governments have institutionalized wealth transfer, created financial dependence, and ensured the survival of the state and its elite patrons. The invisible burden is precisely what makes it effective. The public pays without ever feeling the full impact, while the financial elite consolidates power and wealth under the guise of national progress. Few events in recent history illustrate the modern financial trick more vividly than the 2008 global financial crisis. The collapse of the housing market exposed the reckless behavior of banks and financial institutions worldwide. Subprime mortgages, complex derivatives, and opaque securities had been bundled, sold, and resold, creating a ticking time bomb. When the system finally imploded, the world faced economic chaos. Yet the response from governments revealed a fundamental truth about who truly benefits from the financial system. Governments and central banks rushed to bail out failing institutions, injecting trillions into the economy. Ordinary citizens were told this was necessary to save the system. Streets were not filled with angry mobs because the public did not yet fully understand the mechanisms at play. And in the short term, it worked. Banks were stabilized, markets calmed, and economic collapse was averted. On the surface, this appeared as responsible governance, a rescue for the good of all. The reality was far darker. The principle at work is moral hazard. Those who make reckless decisions face no meaningful consequences when failure occurs, because the state absorbs the losses. Meanwhile, the profits of success remain private. The banks that had taken enormous risks were not punished. They emerged from the crisis stronger, larger, and more concentrated. Ordinary taxpayers, however, funded the bailouts through public debt, inflationary policies, and indirect taxation. Wealth was effectively transferred from the public to private hands, with a veneer of legality and necessity. This pattern is not unique to 2008. It echoes centuries of financial tricks, from forced loans in medieval Europe to government bonds in England. The method has evolved, but the core principle remains. Privatize gains, socialize losses, and rely on perception to disguise the transfer of wealth. Citizens are reassured that the measures are temporary and vital for the common good, even as the financial elite becomes entrenched. The consequences extend beyond immediate wealth transfer. Bailouts distort markets, reward risk-taking at the top, and exacerbate inequality. They create a system in which those with influence or assets are insulated from failure, while those without capital bear the consequences. The public experiences slower wage growth, reduced opportunities, and rising costs, all while being told the economy is recovering. Bailouts demonstrate a critical lesson. The financial system is structured to protect itself first. Government interventions are designed less for fairness and more to maintain stability for those in power. Ordinary citizens are spectators, paying for both the mistakes and the solutions, often without recognizing the ongoing extraction of their wealth. The cycle of boom, crisis, and bailout is not a flaw. It is a repeatable mechanism honed over centuries that transfers resources upward while maintaining the illusion of collective benefit. For decades, ordinary citizens have trusted governments with one of their most important assets: their retirement, pension systems, social security programs, and state-managed funds promise that the money individuals contribute throughout their working lives will be available when they retire. On paper, this appears as security, a guarantee that years of labor will yield comfort and stability in old age. Yet history and practice reveal a far more insidious reality. These systems often function as generational Ponzi schemes, cleverly disguised as benevolent programs. Governments rarely save the money they collect. Instead, contributions from today's workers are spent immediately to fund current obligations. The promise is that future taxpayers will cover the shortfall. This creates an illusion of solvency while effectively shifting the burden onto generations yet unborn. As demographics change, populations age, and the ratio of workers to retirees falls, the system becomes increasingly unsustainable. When that moment arrives, governments reform pensions by cutting benefits, raising the retirement age, or inflating away the real value of payouts. Citizens who trusted the promise suddenly find themselves holding promises, not wealth. This financial trick is subtle because it operates on time. Most individuals do not realize the transfer happening during their working years. By the time the consequences are evident, decades have passed, and the system is defended as necessary and inevitable. Politicians frame reforms as responsible stewardship, obscuring the fact that the public's contributions were already spent elsewhere. Trust becomes a tool of control, and time becomes an accomplice to the extraction of wealth. The psychological effect is profound. Citizens perceive security where there is none. They work diligently, save faithfully, and defer gratification, believing their labor will yield retirement comfort. Yet the system ensures that their sacrifices are redirected to serve state budgets, bondholders, or other financial priorities. The irony is stark. The very programs designed to protect individuals from financial vulnerability often reinforce dependence on the state, leaving retirees exposed to policy shifts, economic volatility, and inflation. This method mirrors ancient practices, from debased coins in Rome to forced loans in medieval Europe. In every era, the elite or ruling class found ways to exploit the labor and savings of ordinary people while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy. Pensions and retirement funds are the modern iteration of that age-old trick, a system that promises stability while channeling wealth upward, hidden behind complex legislation, bureaucratic language, and generational delay. To see the truth, one must understand that time and trust are tools of extraction. Financial literacy is essential. Without it, citizens unknowingly fund their own erosion of wealth. The lesson is clear. Relying entirely on government-managed retirement plans exposes individuals to centuries-old mechanisms designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. When the global financial crisis of 2008 shook the world, central banks deployed a new, sophisticated tool to stabilize markets: quantitative easing. To the public, it sounded technical, almost benign, a policy designed to support the economy and prevent collapse. In reality, it was a modern evolution of an ancient financial trick, a mechanism that quietly redistributes wealth upward while preserving the illusion of stability and growth. Quantitative easing involves the creation of money by central banks to purchase government bonds, mortgage-backed securities, and other financial assets. This flood of liquidity stabilizes markets, lowers interest rates, and ensures that banks and large investors can continue operating. On paper, it is framed as a rescue for the economy. In practice, it primarily inflates the value of assets owned by the wealthy, amplifying the divide between those who have capital and those who do not. The effects are striking. Stock markets surge, real estate prices climb, and bond yields remain secure. For households without large investments, these gains are largely invisible. The middle and lower classes may see minor benefits, low mortgage rates, modest job growth, but the primary beneficiaries are the financial elite. Money is created out of thin air, but its impact is not evenly distributed. The rich get richer. The rest absorb the consequences through higher costs of living and asset scarcity. This policy is essentially a state-sanctioned wealth transfer. Quantitative easing stabilizes the system for those at the top, while exposing the average citizen to the hidden costs: inflation, housing bubbles, and market volatility. The public experiences rising prices, stagnant wages, and difficulty building savings, all while being reassured that the policy is necessary for economic health. The government and central banks frame the narrative as saving the entire population, masking the selective beneficiaries. Historically, this mirrors the tactics of rulers who reduced silver content in coins or imposed forced loans. The tool has evolved, but the mechanism is the same: controlled money creation. Protect the elite and obscure the extraction from public view. It is a modern, highly sophisticated version of the oldest trick in finance, moving wealth upward while keeping the population dependent and unaware. Understanding quantitative easing is critical for financial literacy. It is not a neutral economic policy. It is a deliberate tool that shifts power and resources. Recognizing who truly benefits is the first step toward building real wealth and resisting the subtle manipulations of modern states and central banks. Without awareness, citizens remain unwitting participants in a centuries-old pattern of extraction, struggling against a system designed to favor those already in control. Taxes are one of the most visible ways governments extract resources from their citizens. Yet over centuries, rulers have learned that direct taxation often sparks resistance and unrest. The modern solution is far subtler: stealth taxation, a quiet, almost invisible method of transferring wealth from the many to the few. Instead of openly taking income, governments rely on mechanisms like sales taxes, fuel duties, fees, and, most importantly, inflation, a hidden, pervasive, and highly effective tax on everyday life. Inflation, in particular, operates with deceptive subtlety. Governments may present rising prices as economic growth or market adjustments, while citizens experience a slow erosion of purchasing power. Wages may increase nominally, giving the illusion of prosperity, But if the cost of living rises faster, real wealth diminishes. Savings lose value, debts shrink in real terms, and the financial elite benefits from predictable returns and asset appreciation. In essence, inflation quietly transfers wealth from savers to the state and financial institutions, without ever requiring consent or direct action from the public. This principle is neither new nor accidental. Ancient Rome debased coins, modern states inflate currency through central banks. The mechanics have changed, but the outcome is consistent. Ordinary people bear the burden, while governments and the elite profit. What makes stealth taxation particularly effective today is its invisibility. People rarely notice the cumulative effect of incremental price increases, hidden fees, or devalued currency. Yet these mechanisms extract resources continuously, year after year. Stealth taxation is compounded by modern complexity. Governments introduce hundreds of small levies, obscure charges, and indirect taxes embedded in goods and services. Citizens may see a minor increase in fuel duty or sales tax, but the cumulative effect across multiple products and services amounts to a permanent invisible extraction of wealth. This is financial engineering designed to create dependence while masking the cost. The end result is a population that works harder for less real value, believing the system is functioning normally. Those who hold significant assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, see wealth increase. Those who rely on wages, savings, or pensions experience subtle, ongoing erosion of financial stability. It is a silent, systematic shift of power and resources upward, disguised as normal economic activity. Stealth taxation and currency destruction are reminders that the system is not neutral. Inflation is not a flaw. It is a tool. Rising prices are not accidents. They are part of a long tradition of financial manipulation designed to benefit those at the top, while keeping the majority dependent, distracted, and unaware of the mechanisms that drain their wealth. Governments and elites have long understood that direct control is not always necessary. Often, the most effective financial trick is appearing protective while consolidating power for the few. Regulation, war, finance, and complexity serve this purpose in tandem, masking the transfer of wealth and making it nearly impossible for ordinary citizens to resist. On the surface, regulations exist to protect the public: financial rules, safety standards, consumer protections. Yet history shows that powerful industries often capture the regulators themselves. Railroads in the 19th century, oil companies in the 20th, and modern tech and finance giants today shape the very rules intended to restrain them. Laws are written in their favor, loopholes are preserved, and competition is suppressed. The public sees protection. The insiders see profit and control. Regulation becomes a tool of legitimized extraction. War finance is another enduring mechanism. During World War I and World War II, governments issued vast numbers of bonds, framed as patriotic duty. Citizens believed they were supporting their nations, but these bonds primarily enriched the wealthy, offering secure, risk-free returns guaranteed by future taxes. In the 21st century, wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond have followed the same logic. Trillions are spent benefiting defense contractors, bondholders, and large financial institutions, while ordinary taxpayers shoulder the cost. Wars are always framed as temporary emergencies, yet their financial consequences last generations. Complexity compounds these mechanisms. Modern financial systems, tax codes, budgets, and economic programs are deliberately opaque. Thousands of pages of legal language, acronyms, and buried line items create a fog through which ordinary citizens cannot see. Ancient Romans revealed their manipulations through debased coins, a visible sign of extraction. Today, the transfer occurs behind spreadsheets, balance sheets, and central bank operations. Complexity serves as camouflage. When citizens cannot trace the flow of money, they cannot resist. The result is a system that is transparent only to insiders, while the public remains unaware of the constant transfer of wealth. Taken together, regulation, war, finance, and complexity form a triad of modern financial control. Each tool conceals extraction under the guise of stability, protection, and necessity. Citizens are encouraged to trust the system, believing that rules, patriotism, and institutions are designed for their benefit. In reality, the system is structured to reward the elite, protect entrenched interests, and maintain dependence, a mechanism perfected over centuries. Understanding this dynamic is essential. The public must recognize that appearances can deceive, that crises are often pretexts for wealth transfer, and that the complexity of modern finance is a deliberate strategy. History repeats itself, the instruments evolve, but the objective remains unchanged. Shift resources upward while keeping the majority compliant, distracted, and unaware. If history teaches us anything, it is that the financial tricks of the past are not relics. They are alive and evolving, accelerating in sophistication and scope. Inflation, deficit spending, bailouts, stealth taxation, and complex regulations are no longer isolated tools. They are interconnected mechanisms that reinforce one another, ensuring that the transfer of wealth upward is faster, broader, and more hidden than ever before. Central banks now wield unprecedented power. They create money with a few keystrokes, inject liquidity into markets, and dictate interest rates worldwide. Quantitative easing, low interest rates, and direct asset purchases inflate financial markets, while the average household feels only the rising cost of essentials. The wealthy, who own most stocks, real estate, and bonds, see their assets surge. The majority, reliant on wages and savings, experience gradual erosion of purchasing power. This is financial manipulation on a scale that previous generations could scarcely imagine. Debt levels provide another lens on this acceleration. Governments, corporations, and households have amassed historic levels of borrowing. Each year, trillions of dollars are added to public debt, much of it financed by ordinary citizens through indirect taxation, inflation, and reduced social services. The system is designed so that the cost of servicing this debt falls disproportionately on the working and middle classes, while the returns secure interest payments, rising asset values, and profitable bailouts flow to those with capital. Globalization amplifies the effect. International trade, cross-border investment, and multinational corporations allow governments and financial institutions to shift risks, profits, and losses across borders. The public absorbs the costs while profits concentrate in the hands of global elites. Crises, whether financial, environmental, or geopolitical, are transformed into opportunities to accelerate wealth transfers rather than disrupt them. Bailouts, stimulus packages, and emergency spending are no longer exceptions. They are predictable mechanisms of wealth consolidation. The pace of innovation in financial instruments also matters. Derivatives, algorithmic trading, digital currencies, and complex credit products create layers of opacity that the average citizen cannot navigate. Complexity is no longer an inconvenience. It is a deliberate shield that protects elite wealth from scrutiny. When citizens cannot follow money flows, they cannot resist, protest, or protect their own assets. The system is self-reinforcing. Complexity ensures dependence, and dependence ensures control. Finally, education, or the lack thereof, magnifies these trends. Most people are unaware of economic history, the mechanics of debt, or the principles of monetary policy. This ignorance is exploited. Governments and elites rely on the public's lack of financial literacy to mask extraction, normalize inequality, and maintain compliance. History, however, offers a weapon. Understanding these patterns is the first step toward resistance. Recognizing that these tricks are accelerating allows individuals to act strategically rather than passively, protecting their wealth and independence in a system designed to take both. History is not just a record of events, it is a blueprint for understanding the patterns of power and wealth. The financial tricks that plagued Roman citizens, medieval merchants, and early bondholders are the same mechanisms at work today, only disguised in modern language, policies, and institutions. Recognizing these patterns is essential because the system does not exist to serve ordinary citizens. It exists to protect itself and those already in control. The final lesson from history is stark. Ignorance is the most effective tool of extraction. People who accept inflation, debt, and bailouts as natural or necessary are the easiest to manipulate. Those who study, understand, and anticipate are far harder to control. The financial tricks of Rome, medieval Europe, and early modern England were visible to the informed few. Today, the mechanisms are complex, but the outcome is the same. Wealth moves upward, dependence grows, and power consolidates. In the end, financial education is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. Understanding the patterns allows individuals to recognize the traps before they snap. The tools of the past, debased coins, forced loans, and state-backed debt, have been replaced with digital currency, central bank policies, and globalized financial instruments. But the principle remains eternal. Wealth extraction succeeds when the public is blind, uninformed, or complacent. Study the past, question the present, and secure your future before the system drains it from your hands.